Our next speaker هي نادين فالنتينا مهندسة معمارية متحصلة على دكتوراه أستاذة جامعية في الهندسة المعمارية والتصميم الحضري في الكلية المعمارية بجامعة سيسترزا في روما. عضو مجلس إدارة برنامج الدكتوراه، مدرب مدرسة الهندسة المعمارية النظرية والتصميم، عضو في مختبر البحوث المعمارية التصميم آركس لابس، مندوب لتدوير قسم الهندسة المعمارية والمشاريع، درجة ماجستير المزدوجة الهندسة المعمارية والتخطيط الإقليمي من معهد جورجيا للتكنولوجيا الولايات المتحدة. شاركت في العديد من المسابقات المعمارية وحصلت على جوائز وشهادات تقدير يمكن رؤيتها أبحاثها ومشاريعها النظرية المتعلقة بالتراث المعماري والأثر الصناعية والعمارة المعاصرة في العديد من المنشورات والمعارض والمؤتمرات في أوروبا وأمريكا وآسيا. فتفضل Professor Valentin. Please, thank you for being with us, and I'll leave the podium for you to present your work. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just tell me when I can begin. I don't see the PowerPoint. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. In the last decades, many major cities in the world have been rethinking their urban redevelopment strategies, rejecting the old approach of promoting continuous urban expansion, as well as the demolition of historic buildings and neighborhoods to make new constructions. Many cities are embracing a new attitude toward a measured and gradual urban regeneration of areas that can lead cities towards a new kind of rebirth. In fact, many cities are undertaking important actions concerning the protection, restoration, regeneration of historical centers. Please, next slide. The second slide. For these reasons, today, this workshop pays attention to the old city of Benghazi. a place where urban reconstruction means not only the redevelopment of areas damaged by war, but also the opportunity to define, safeguard, and enhance architecture and urban heritage, to develop the necessary infrastructures for the complete and best functionality of the area, and to promote the urban regeneration of an historical center important for the identity of the city and people's memory. Next slide, please. Benghazi is a city with a unique historical stratification. Each historical period has provided the city with a distinct architecture and urban structure, strongly related to its identity. Important ancient ruins, buildings of different civilizations and in periods, an important seaport, several major industries, among many other things. All this has had a strong impact on the architecture and urban fabric of the city, as well as on the cultural and socio-economic aspects. Since an historic center is usually felt as the heart of the city, and people often feel displaced and disconnected to their own city when their historic center is damaged, urban regeneration and reconstruction become the best tool for upgrading and improve a part of city that belongs in any case to the memory of the community. I believe that post-war reconstructions become the best tool for upgrading and improve a part of city that belongs in any case, as I said, to the community. And I believe that post-war reconstruction should not bury the scars of war by creating a completely new face for the city. Urban regeneration and reconstruction are a means to preserve and respect pre-war memories by proposing in a contemporary way an architecture and urban character that belongs to the city. Next slide. In synthesis, with the term urban regeneration, we mean in our case a process of redevelopment, reconstruction of a damaged historical center, where the physical improvement of the areas implies the enhancement of cultural and historical heritage, the perpetuation of the unique architecture and urban character of the place, the improvement of people's quality of life, the creation of new cultural and socioeconomic activities, and the development of cities' identity and people's memory. All this in order not only to bring a historic center back to life, but also to leave a legacy to future generations. Next slide, please. One of our main concerns is how to approach this kind of challenge. Here I show 5 general design procedures that I consider important when dealing with urban regeneration reconstruction. First, it is important to make an in-depth study analysis of the historic area. This kind of study analysis of the urban fabric, architecture, history, cultural, infrastructure characteristics of the place allow not only the development of the best type of interventions to do in the historic center, but also the creation of a damage and needs assessment. The second point is the development of a strategic urban vision. This implies the development of an urban plan that emphasizes not only the individual buildings, but the entire historic center. Important is the integration and the interconnection of the historic center with its surrounding urban context, such as the waterfront and the other neighborhoods. Third point is the development of specific architecture and urban ancient plans. New interventions must deal with the specific character of the historic center, that is, the existing architecture, urban, and infrastructure conditions. At this point, it is important to develop a series of architecture and urban action plans based on a list of priorities. Mixed uses, as well as the enhancement and creation of open public spaces, such as pedestrian areas, squares, are a good approach to encourage social inclusion and economic activities in these areas. This allows the development of a sustainable and livable city. The fourth point is the protection and enhancement of historical and cultural heritage that is an added value to the project. And finally, the fifth point is the development of a participatory process, since the active participation of local governments, decision makers, public and private stakeholders, institutions, and local communities allows decisions to be sustainable. Next slide, please. In the following slides, we will see how different projects have been approached. This is the case of the Historic Center of Wuhan, where the morphological and typological analysis follow the identification of the major historical buildings, monuments, main infrastructure, public open spaces, land uses. Next slide, please. In this project, we also find the development of a general and detailed damage assessment, that is, buildings to be protected, buildings to be redeveloped, buildings to be replaced. Next slide, please. For the redevelopment of the Historic Center of Bologna, Italy, partially destroyed during the Second World War, a series of analyses were followed by a reconstruction plan where the architecture and urban character of the city was maintained. Next slide. In the Historic Center of Dresden, we find the same analytical approach and a final solution where the original character of the city was maintained during reconstruction. Next slide. In Historic Mostar in Sarajevo, we find how the new urban redevelopment has made the city a new culture and tourist destination. In their case, the contribution of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture and the World Monument Fund was central. Next slide, please. Now I will show you some professional and academic works that deal with the redevelopment of large urban areas. Next slide. This is the study for the General Master Plan of Rome. Here, 5 main critical areas were identified as strategic zones for redevelopment, all characterized by the strong presence of disused or abandoned historical buildings. Several proposals were made for the various areas. Next slide, please. This is the proposal for the transformation and urban renewal of San Lorenzo area in Rome, a first prize project. Next slide, please. Here, the main problem was to deal with a totally degraded urban fabric and the development of a series of buildings and pedestrian bridges to connect two neighborhoods separated by railroad tracks. Next slide, please. The following 2 academic projects deal with large disused areas. This is the proposal for the redevelopment of the gasometer area of the city of Rome. Next slide. The methodological approach was to follow a zoom analytical process that goes from the large urban scale of the area to the scale of the buildings. First, a territorial and urban analysis was done. Next slide, please. A historical analysis. Next slide. An existing buildings typology study. Next slide. The functional vehicle and pedestrian systems. Next slide. The project then was developed by zones. And this is just the proposal for the riverfront area. To the right, you can see the general site plan. Next slide, please. The second proposal is the redevelopment of the Exitoco area in Orbetello, Italy. It is situated in a place with a strong environmental and naturalistic value. And the main idea was to develop new educational, residential, commercial areas while maintaining the historical character of the place. New architectural additions, extensions, combined together with the restoration of some buildings to create a place enhanced by the creation of a central pedestrian mall and a waterfront promenade. Next slide, please. The design procedures once again follow the zoom approach. First, the study and analysis of the territory and of the environment to identify the potentials of the critical aspects of the area. Next slide, please. Then a series of historical analysis to better understand the importance of the place. Next slide. Existing buildings were also studied in order to identify the problems of the area. Next slide, please. These are other existing building studies. Next slide. These are some of the architecture urban strategies proposed. Next slide. These are the proposed objectives and strategies. Next slide, please. This is the final solution. In the next 4 slides, you can see some architecture solutions for the area. Next slide. These are elevations and sections of the different buildings in this area. Please go ahead, another slide. Another slide, please, and another slide. And finally, the other slide shows some general views of the area. There are 2 general views of the areas. Next slide. In this view, you can see the main central mall and the waterfront promenade that was created to bring the complex back to life. Now, next slide, please. In synthesis, urban regeneration of historic centers equal reconstruction, recovery, and enhancement of historic centers with particular attention to the specificity of the place. In this approach, we're dealing with the following necessary steps: in-depth study and analysis of the historic area, identification of cultural and architectural heritage, the development of damage and needs assessment, the development of a series of action plans and list of priorities with short and long-term objectives, the identification of funding modalities, the need to develop reconstruction guidelines that facilitate the management and the design control of the reconstruction, and finally, the need for the participation of local government, decision makers, public and private stakeholders, cultural institutions, local communities. All of them to make the project become a reality. Next slide, please. Taking a look at the urban regeneration of Altamura in Puglia, Italy, okay. Or next slide, please. Or the pedestrian areas of Italian cities such as Rome, Milan, and Naples. One aspect we can see is that to create a sustainable city, it is important to create places for people. Next slide and final slide, where urban regeneration means not only a dialogue with the past, but also innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pedestrian. Thank you for a very rich presentation. We're hoping one day you will be able to join us here in Benghazi and we can have a great workshop with you and with our architects and planners and students. We have a lot to gain from you. It was a very rich presentation, especially I like the strength of Croatia. Also, something that I was in Arabic,
Che è stato, che non vedrai perché là è chiuso, ma che fa?
Our next speaker هو ماركو بتريسكي. ماركو بتريسكي مهندس معماري واستاذ جامعي في العماره والتصميم الحضري بكليه الهندسه المعماريه بجامعه سوسبنسا في روما. في عام 2001 اسس دوره تعليميه في العمارة الداخلية في كلية الهندسة المعمارية، مؤسس استوديو تريسكي اركيتكتس والذي أول نشاطه منذ 1972. ضيف المحاضرة أستاذ زائر في مختلف الجامعات الأوروبية والأمريكية والآسيوية، مشاريعه وبحوثه النظرية من الممكن إيجادها إلى العديد من المنشورات والمقالات والبناء ومنح مشاريع الأعمال عامة مهمة مستدامة نتائج مسابقات الوطنية والدولية، والتي العديد منها موجود في كتب ومجلات ومعارض ومؤتمرات. لديه سلسلة من الرسومات أودعت في خزنة للرسومات بمكتبة الفاتيكان بينما تم الحصول على بعض المشاريع بواسطة المتاحة الوطنية للفنون للقرن الحادي والعشرين بروما. فليتفضل بروفيسور مارتن باتريسكي. Please start your presentation.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Good morning.
We can hear you, but the image is not clear.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and allow me to thank all those who invite me to present my project and at the important conference. The purpose of my intervention is to prove that it's possible to regenerate historical buildings if they are destroyed and sometimes restore them lives, making them better than when they were new. Therefore, I illustrate 4 abandoned and destroyed historical buildings, each of which are located in different urban contexts, and the way in which I restored and renewed them, giving in some cases a new destination. So for each of them, I will not illustrate taking them for granted the 3 fundamental elements that must be faced every time you design historical or monumental building. First, archive and historical research. Second, structural and functional analysis. Third, behaviors and tradition of people to whom historical building will be destinated. All this means to respect the continuity for local identity. In conclusion, I hope with this exposition of this 4 project, at least, to demonstrate that the lack of a sensitivity around the protection and preservation of one's history, I mean also institutional, residential, industrial architecture, is a serious mistake that erases the past, but not guaranteeing thus the right lines of growth of the future. Not only, but also destroys the formation of the new generation by educating them only to the mere profit. So I begin to expose you this project.
Next.
So, for this reason, the first one, please, next. We are in the center of, the first example is in the center of Rome, next. And we can see the abandoned building that was a residential building and it was completely destroyed. Next. For this reason, I make all the relief in the archives to find the original drawings. And at the end, we arrive next to the final solution. Next. So we can go little by little, one by one. The next one. So you can see before and after the intervention. So, next. Internal, we can see also the interior design. Next.
Next slide.
Next slide. Next slide. Next. And we can see also all the finishing of the building and the furniture. Next. Next, the meeting room. Next. The main entrance. Next. The main entrance. Okay. So we land in another country of Italy, in the center of Italy. There is an important little town that this is the historical center. Next. And so the principal element of this town is an ancient pontifical custom. Next. So the same operation archives. Then the situation. Next. The situation before the project. Next, drawings. Next slides again. And so again. Yes, next. So this way we can see the different before and after the restoration. Next, details of the single part. Next. And next, the final solution, the rear elevation, and next, the front elevation.
Next slide.
Then, now we land in another town. We landed in Tirana. Next. Tirana is in a certain way similar to Benghazi because many buildings were realized by Italian architects. So from this drawing, we can see the principal element. And I have the fortune to realize two of them and to restore in an international competition. And these two buildings are the new Central Bank of Albania and Hotel Deity. So starting from archive, next, we have a look around the typical architecture of the period that were necessary to have a basis to the new project. So this is the building next that we are going to restore. And this situation, this is the building in 1939 when it was finished. But the situation in next, the situation was completely destroyed, abandoned, and ruined. So we arrived to restore everything next, throughout, next, a lot of analysis. First of all, analysis for what was the structural analysis. Then next, for the floor finishing. Next, for the composition in plant, composition next in elevation. Next, studying every single part of the building, decoration, windows, banister, bracken, and many other things. Not only, but also taking care, next, to, there's a fundamental thing, to the structure that was not adopted nowadays for a seismic situation. And so I want to show you all some details of the restoration of the structure. Next. We adopted the most actual system to reinforce all the structure of the building. Then, also in this case, we arrived to design all the interior design. Next. And next, all the single offices in every sector. Then, next, we can see the drawings, the final solution. Next. And so in plant, with the addition of a park, new offices, and next, This is the final solution with parking and the roof garden that we can see next in this part. And this is the final solution next. So the last one is as I told you, is the restoration and addition next of the Central Bank of Albania. You know that the Central Bank is a unique building in a nation. So this was the result of an international competition, and you can see the building of the Central Bank in the principal square of Tirana, Skanderbeg Square, next. And so the situation in which I found this building before beginning the project. So next, this was the situation, completely abandoned and totally destroyed in many parts of them. As I told you before, first operation, the study of archives, next. And so we find all the drawings designed by the previous architect was Morpurgo, a very important architect during the 30s in Italy. And so from these drawings, in brief, I want to show you next. That was the beginning of this work. So we can see that in 1939, there is the pre-existing building. The second part is a concept, the third part is the final solution. Next. So it was a very complicated work because we have to make a lot of work because we have to design a full-level parking. Very important this thing because it was in the center of the town, and so it was necessary to invent a new underground park. We can go on. Next. These are the executive drawings where you can see the relation between the new and the old building. Then next, some details of the restoration with the materials and many other things. So the final solution next is this one. Next, please. So we make also the restoration of the interior design according with the original drawings. This on the old building, not in the new one. I can show you also the restoration of other part of the building. Next, we can see the language is a language of the typical of 30s, but now we make also the interior next in a sort of dialogue between new and old. So the next, from here, perhaps it's a technical drawings, but it's very easy to understand the relationship in a sort of dialogue between the architecture of Morpurgo and my architecture. The final situation is this next. So here is very clear the relationship between old and new. Next, that we can see exactly in these three images, in which you can see the situation at the beginning, before, and then after. Another one, please. Yes, and another one are many other details that for we are speaking about these things like it was very easy to do such typical work, but we are speaking of course of years of work. In this case, 6 years of work to arrive to the final solution. This is the main entrance. Then next we can see also other part of the building. With these are the new addition. in which there is a sort of dialogue with the pre-existing elements, because we use the same materials and also the same part of the building is in a sort of dialogue with the rest of the old one. Next, this is the building in the town at the end. Another one, please, next. So you see the mason that you see on the right side, that the new part, are the same mason that use the old building. So to have a connection, also if the language is a little different, but you can see the different approach to this problem. Next. Next. This is the final. Next. This is the final side. And I want to conclude my speech with this idea, that is the idea that is always in all this work you have seen. And this is sometimes the goal of architecture, is to be able to achieve a restitution of the actually of historical legacies that still retain within them enormous expressive potential. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Professor Marco. It was a very, very rich interior, especially presentation. While you were presenting, made me think so much of the second Benghazi, some of the houses are abandoned. How can we transfer them to a better place? أعتقد أن البروفيسور ماركو أعطانا فكرة كويسة إن العمارة مش بس المبنى من الخارج، حتى من الداخل هو ضروري. أعطانا فكرة إنه ممكن نحل مشاكل من ناحية الباركينج، إنه في طرق نقدر نزور أدوار تحت الأرض علشان نحل مشاكل الباركينج، حتى للمباني التاريخية وتغيير نقدر المباني اللي نقول الواقع الأثر غير موجودين فيه. المتحدث الثالث هو بروفيسور والتر بريتشي، مهندس معماري عضو سابق في المجلس الوطني للمهندسين المدنيين، ناشط في مجالات التعاون والتضامن وحماية المدينة، وأيضا خبير في تاريخ العمارة مع إشارة خاصة إلى عمارة القرن العشرين في interest عمارة القرن العشرين في فليتفضل بروفيسور والتر. هو مكتوب بالعربي فولتر بس هي أعتقد it's والتر. Anyway, we're ready to listen to your presentation. Go ahead. Thank you.
It's okay. Oh. Good afternoon. I thank the representatives of the municipality of Benghazi and the Consulate of Italy for the invitation to participate in this important workshop, and I am honored to be with you. I will accompany my speech with a brief review of documents taken from the Italian archives that you can see in the scrolling of the slides. And I introduce my speech with a reference to the Barcelona Declaration of 1995. The tradition of culture and civilization throughout the Mediterranean region, the dialogue between these cultures, and the exchanges on a human, scientific, and technological level are essential factors in bringing the peoples of their respective countries closer together, fostering understanding between them and improving their perception mutual. The Mediterranean basin probably represents an absolutely unique case in the world. In fact, this area has been the cradle of fundamental civilization for at least 3 continents, as well as the element of division and of cohesion between different cultures. Thanks to this particular feature, the Mediterranean concentrates most of the planet's cultural heritage. This immense patrimony, whose evident cultural but also economic potentials are increasingly recognized by all countries, involves an equally immense management effort as regards the documentation, protection and conservation of the assets themselves. In fact, the cultural heritage is not only enriched in every moment with new productions, but it is renewed and grows through all of the research initiatives capable of bringing out new assets, or even only of proposing new interpretation of the heritage and authors from the past. This heritage also represents one of the founding elements on which tourism in the Mediterranean area could be developed, just like it has already happened in the past. The architecture of the modern first half of the 20th century is a legacy that was fairly well preserved in Libya until a few years ago. Benghazi was one of the places of experimentation of urban and architectural modernity. Today, its protection requires confronting the values of its recent memory, and its survival depends on the 3 fundamental elements. A. Protection by public institutions. B. The sensitivity of the designers called to operate. C. The promotion of a culture of identity that rediscovers the common matrices of the Mediterranean. The relationship between project documents, complete work, and preserved work is a basic condition for a correct restoration. The availability and knowledge of the documents must be considered an indispensable tool for providing the designer with the interpretative case of the work, together with the architectural survey and direct analysis of materials, construction techniques, condition of decay and instability. The period of the Italian occupation in Libya has left a very large number of architectures expressing a nationalism that today fully belong to the Libyan national heritage. Over 50 public and private Italian archives preserve documentation on Libyan architectures, a significant number of drawings and photographs relating to public and private interventions, whose little memory and feedback remains in Libya. These documents represent an indispensable resource for the knowledge, protection, and enhancement of the architectural cultural heritage. In Benghazi, over 50 buildings of Italian architecture have been registered. Half of them remains in archival documents. 20 architects and engineers have worked, Italian architects and engineers have worked in the city. Among these, some of the most talented designers of the time: Marcello Piacentini, Luigi Piccinato, Florestano Di Fausto, Guido Ferrazza, Ottavio Cabiati, Alberto Alparo Novello, and many others. In 2017, this attention allowed to a country like Eritrea a great attestation. Eritrea obtained, in fact, the declaration as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO for the capital Asmara in virtue of its modernist and rationalist Italian architecture. Every intervention on historical architecture or on the the city must be preceded by a long and laborious process of knowledge. It is necessary to adopt an ethically and respectful protocol. It is necessary to go beyond the appearance by penetrating into the innermost and hidden structures of an architectural work. We can be able to orient the actions aimed to its conservation or recovery. The restoration project must more properly, in this context we talk about of recovery and regeneration, the restoration is carried out in accordance with the guidelines of the Venice Declaration 1964 and Krakow 2000, through a cognitive process that involves the collection of information and the complete knowledge of the building or site. Again, the Krakow Charter states that each community, through its own collective memory and awareness of its past, is responsible for identifying and managing its own heritage. The architectural, urban, and landscape heritage, as well as the individual artifacts of this, is the result of an identification associated with the different historical moments and the various socio-cultural contexts. In conclusion, proposals: rebuild an archive of the municipality that allows A. Retrieve an important part of the historical memory on the development of architecture and urban planning in Benghazi as an essential contribution to the activities of an urban center. B. Create an iconographic database functional to policies and programs. C. Constitute a knowledge tool dedicated to technical professionals, government officials, university students, stakeholders. My little contribute is over, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Also, it's great input, the amount of information and archive that's available to us in the Italian archive that we can make use of it, and we can understand so much of the meaning of the building today. Many of the slides I haven't seen before, and it was nice to see especially on the last slides about the freehand sketches from Bernici's Cellular Bernini. Our next speaker, they come from the Association of Construction and Engineering. We had to bring it in front because the change of time, they have a meeting they have to attend. So our next presentation will be from the association, group of association in construction and engineering firms. Please start your presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I am Andrea Grilletto, Director of Asso Restauro, and I'm pleased to be here. And I want to thank you, the Italian Consulate and the Italian Trade Agency, for inviting Asso Restauro here, and all the local authorities. I am here representing not only Asso Restauro, but also ANCE, PNA, and OICE, as National Association of Companies representing the restoration sector. I can share now the presentation. So we are talking about the supply chain of made in Italy restoration, from tradition to innovation. As probably everyone knows, the cultural heritage sector in Italy is one of the most important sectors we have in terms of annual turnover. Italy is one of the most important countries in the world for the number of UNESCO sites. We have the same number, 58, as China, but with a different dimension, both in terms of citizens and area. But the cultural heritage in Italy is not represented only by the UNESCO sites or by the big monuments that everyone knows all over the world. In Italy, we have more than 200,000 listed cultural assets. That means that, and this is a small part of the historic building that we have in Italy. Everyone who have had the opportunity to visit Italy surely knows that visiting an historical center, a city, a village, wherever in Italy, you are immersed into history, and we have developed a sector.
Andrea, sorry, Andrea, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, sorry, Andrea.
Sorry, but we cannot hear anything. Again, we cannot hear anything.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, now we can hear.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And I thank you for inviting me to this important workshop. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes, for now.
Thank you. The subject of my short speech is how to set up a restoration project for a historic building, with particular attention to those that have suffered war damages. Italy was faced with the problem of rebuilding its historic cities and monuments at the end of the Second World War. Therefore, Italian architects and restorers had to deal with this issue, searching for the most appropriate methodology and developing updated technical skills. The extent of the intervention depends on the level of damage. In the case of minor damage, restoration will be possible according to the principle of conservative restoration. More difficult to deal with is the case of building with major damage or totally demolished. In these cases, it is essential that the reconstruction should be part of a more general urban plan with the primary objective of preserving the historical urban texture without disrupting it, for example, by avoiding the insertion of buildings with a language in direct contrast to the existing one. This does not mean that buildings should be reconstructed as perfect imitations of those that were destroyed. On the contrary, this should be avoided in order not to create a fake historic building. The surviving parts of a building must be carefully restored, and in order to still be able to use it, the building itself must be completed with other parts that must be recognizable as new works. The new additions must, of course, harmonize with the surrounding urban context in terms of proportion. They may also recall the architectural language of the original building, not by imitating it to perfection, but, for example, by simplifying it to search a dialogue with the surrounding area. Or they may use similar materials or colors to match the surviving parts, etc. I will show some practical examples in the last slides of my talk. In any case, the architectural design must be of high quality and based on preliminary studies and a very accurate knowledge of the structure. All this is part of a conservative restoration approach, of which I now want to give some technical indication, considering the real case of the Benghazi Cathedral, a building that has suffered minor damage in comparison with the other Italian buildings and historical buildings in Benghazi. And this building falls within the case where it's possible to carry out a restoration project according to a consolidated scientific method. To begin with, I will mention some of the main criteria in conservation of historic buildings as starting points for the Benghazi Cathedral project. The first is the maximum conservation of the original material, that is, respect for material authenticity, through minimum restoration. This is the concept of minimum intervention. The aim is to limit and slow down the degradation without acting in an invasive way and without trying to mask the repair with heavy alteration. The second criteria is a lower possible degree of tampering with the original structural design of a building. And the last is the technological compatibility between what exists and the new intervention. The decision to preserve and reuse a historic building required a multidisciplinary approach and should be based on a complete understanding of it. That's why the conservation project cannot ignore a preliminary phase of knowledge organized in steps that are similar to those used in medicine: anamnesis, diagnosis, therapy, and control, corresponding respectively to the searches for significant data and information, such as architectural history, language, construction techniques, characteristic of materials and structure, etc., to the individuation of the causes of damage and decay, to the choice of the remedial measures, and control of the efficiency of the intervention. The preliminary knowledge phase should not be seen as a waste of time delaying the start of the actual project. It is already an integral and indispensable part of it. In this diagram, I have tried to summarize the various phases of the conservation project. The first step must be the preliminary analysis that can be divided into indirect and direct type. By indirect analysis, we mean those that do not involve direct physical contact with the building. The most important of them are based on bibliographic and archival research. By direct analysis, we mean those carried out through on-site inspections, such as geometric survey, survey of building materials, survey of degradation phenomena, including the extent of war damages. The results of this analysis will provide the information needed to make a diagnosis and thus to determine the most appropriate method of intervention. I would like to give you an example of this method applied to the case of the Benghazi Cathedral. It's the outcome of a research carried out under an international research project signed in 2021 by the University of Brescia and the Bernice University of Architecture and Urbanism of Benghazi. As architect Baricchi already shown, most of the projects are kept in Italian archives, and through the original plans, it was possible for us to understand the construction characteristic of this church and what technologies and materials were used. On these slides, you can see, for example, here in the middle of the slide, the diagram of the reinforced concrete structure, or here, I don't know if you can see my mouse on top right, the description of the types of stones and their laying patterns. The information from the original plans was then compared with direct observation to check for any changes during the construction phase or due to modification that the building had undergone over the years. This, for example, is the so-called material survey, a drawing showing the different types of materials used in the construction of the facades of a building. In the case of this cathedral, due to the impossibility of the Italian members of the research group to carry out on-site inspection, analysis of the cathedral's state of conservation was based on accurate photographic support, specifically made by our Libyan colleagues. And this experimentation of carrying out a survey from afar was itself part of the research and had the aim of testing its degree of reliability and sharing a working method based on the use of common specialized terminology that would facilitate exchanges between technicians and companies from different countries. Despite a long period of neglect and exposure to the risk of war, structurally, the cathedral appears to be in a very good state of preservation. The reinforced concrete superstructure, where exposed, shows no significant signs of deterioration, nor are there any major structural deformation or visible big cracks that could indicate a static problem. Degradation phenomena can be classified according to natural or man-made causes. The former involved exposure to the elements and the proximity to the sea, aggravated by the lack of maintenance for over 40 years, in particular on the roofs and the windows, that had led to infiltration of rainwater and the formation of severe humidity stain and salt efflorescence, which affect most of the internal plaster surfaces of the building. As you can see in this slide, the results of the visual assessment of the state of conservation were represented graphically on a geometric survey base. This locates the various areas of deterioration in greater detail and indicates their probable causes. The Benghazi Cathedral Conservation Project will have to eliminate the causes of material deterioration and mitigate its effects. And the drawing you see on this slide shows in detail the technical restoration works planned on this building. I won't describe them in detail because I would like to conclude my speech by saying a few words about one of the most complex problems that had to be faced, especially in the case of buildings damaged by war events. It's the treatment of the lacunae and the reconstruction of the collapsed parts of the structure. Of course, damaged buildings have to be rebuilt, but how? Respecting their material authenticity, making easy to identify the new addition. I wish to show here some practical examples used to restore war damage in Italy after the Second World War. Here you can see different methods of reintegration used to highlight the added parts, such as, for example, in this case, a sign in the brick wall separating the two different parts. On the left, the new part of the monument, and on the right, the original part of the monument. Or this figure on the right, in this figure on the right, the reconstruction of a part of wall by building the new surface backward or forward in relation to the original layer. This last example of how to reconstruct the missing part of a collapsed structure shows, in my opinion, how respect for the criteria of preservation of architectural heritage can favor reconstruction works of high architectural quality as an alternative to the imitative and fake reconstruction, or even worse, replacement of the historical texture with modern buildings. Previous experiences elsewhere show that if the reconstruction of Benghazi's historic buildings were to follow a conservation approach, the city's historical, architectural, cultural, and also economic value would be enhanced. I would hope so, and thank you for your attention.
Good morning, good afternoon again. I'm sorry for these technical problems. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I try to share the screen and start again from where I was talking before. As far as I know, you have listened to the first part of the speech, so I'm starting again from the restoration made in Italy.
Your microphone is mute.
Andrea, non ti sentiamo più.
Il microfono è spento.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, I'm very sorry. I don't know what's the technical problem is. In 2019, the Italian government have recognized restoration as part of the national Made in Italy promotional system. That's something that made us very proud and also give us an important role in the economic life of our country. That means that we have a more structured policy of promotion of our sector all over the world. We are cooperating since 2005 with the Italian Trade Agency to promote the restoration. We have been working since that time with the ordinary promotional system, and from 2019 we have changed our perspective and we are part, together with fashion, food and furniture, of the Made in Italy sector. I have prepared, I would like to show you a short video, the official national Italian video promoting the restoration sector. I hope you can hear the voice of the video. I just check if I can share the sound of my computer. Okay, I think it's okay, and I'm starting the video.
No audio.
Of greatness upon our feelings.
Ok.
Sometimes overlooks the joy to roam among the energies of the history that surrounds us. Everyone has a purpose, something to achieve, somewhere to go, a place to belong to. However, sometimes the best part of a journey is getting lost. Allow yourself the time to take the lesser traveled route and let your passion take over. Let yourself be surprised by the unexpected. History is everywhere. How can you think about life without it? Sometimes I ask myself, what's beyond the surface? Everything I've undiscovered from the past makes makes me conscious of our future. We are all part of a synchronized process, cooperating together to achieve the common goal, to design the final vision. A perfect balance between history and technology contributes to the optimal preservation of our heritage and leads it into the future. Tradition has defined rules, while our modern industrial supply chains become stronger, boosting our approach and proficiency. All this heritage value surrounds us, even where you don't expect it. Be curious. You'll discover a new knowledge that will help you to grow. Eventually, I peeled back the history beyond the surface, other lives, other journeys. My work is not finished yet. There's a huge heritage to look after, to carve in memory, and to preserve for next generations. This is who I am, what I stand for. This is my profession.
And that's what we want to stress. There are two main aspects that we have tried to emphasize in this official national video representing the restoration sector. The first one is how tradition and new technologies are working to strengthen our capacity of protecting our building and how the valorization of our building through the new technologies is now one of the most important aspects. The second topic that we have tried to stress in this video is how in Italy, more than in other countries, working in the preservation sector is a profession. That's the final sentence of our video. This is my profession. That means that we have in Italy companies, architects, professionals that are working only or specifically in the restoration field. And that's very, very important. As I was telling at the beginning, I'm not here on behalf only of Assorestaro, and I'm pleased to be here to represent ANCE, the National Association of Building Companies, CNA, National Confederation of Craft Sector, and OICE, the Italian Association of Engineering, Architectural and Technical Economy Consulting Organization. ANCE is the National Association of Building Companies representing the Italian companies of any size organizing in the construction field. The construction contributes to the 8.2% of the GDP, which reaches the 22%, also including real estate activities and supply chain. 22.5% of the Italian industrial employment. A growing sector, investments in the construction sector grew by the 16.4% in 2021 with records number. Production plus 24.3%, employment plus 11.8%. That is very, very important for our economy, as I was saying. TNAs has been representing and protecting the interest of the craft companies, which are a very important part of the restoration sector, SMEs, and all forms of self-employed workers for over 70 years. 670,000 members, 370,000 of which are craft entrepreneurs, 20,000 industry, 30,000 micro enterprises. CNA.
Please share the screen. Thank you.
That's not sharing?
No, thank you.
Okay, I'm sharing again. Okay. More than 450 associates, members, yearly turnover amount 3.5 billion of euros. Member companies employ about 25,000 engineers, architects, geologists, and economists. 60% of the revenue abroad as follows. And as you can see from the screen. Oice, the fourth company represented here, represent the world of professionals. Civil engineers, territorial, transport, architecture, urban planning, and so on. The services that Oice is providing in Italy and abroad are feasibility studies, strategic plan, investigation and surveys, architecture, engineering, design, tendering, assistance and supervision of works, urban planning, design of restoration, rehabilitation, and adaptive reviews project. You can see some of the projects that they are managing in the restoration field. At the end, the third company, which I'm representing directly as a director, has been established, as I told you, in 2005. And at the time, our big target was to representing Italy abroad. Assorestaro have been established on the headquarters of the Italian Trade Agency in Rome to represent the newborn industry of restoration. What we are representing are the whole world of restoration in terms of services, diagnostic and design, production of material technologies and equipment, restoration work, that means companies working in the restoration field, valorization and musealization. I want to talk to you about briefly some specific projects, promotional project that we have led during the last years together with the Italian Trade Agency. Here you can see the restoration project of the Imrar Mosque in Istanbul. The Imrar Mosque is the oldest Christian settlement in Constantinople, the Studian monastery. It has been transformed into a mosque, the Imrar Mosque, in the 15th century. And now the General Directorate of Foundation, the Turkish organization which is managing and controlling all the religious building of Turkey, is planning to make restoration. And they have asked to Italy and to the Italian Trade Agency and Assorestaro to prepare the restoration project through examples. We have organized a pilot project and we have restored the part of the main surfaces as an example for the companies who will participate with the restoration technique. Another important example that we have followed is the Italian-Russian School of Restoration that we have organized under the financing of the Italian Trade Agency together with the restoration organization in Russia, the Technical University of Moscow, and the University La Sapienza in Rome. 385 hours of frontal lesson in Moscow, 3 weeks of the Russian professionals in Italy to talk about restoration and create common language. The third example I want to show you is the Italian Center for Restoration and Design that we have established together with the Italian Trade Agency in Cuba, the house of the Italians, which wants to promote their companies in Cuba. A house, a common house, as you can see from the image, a colonial house in the old city of La Habana, which have been restored together by the Italians and the Cuban professionals. It is the first example of a building abroad measured by the GBCHB, the National Protocol of Sustainability for Historical Building, promoted by the Green Building Council of Italy. It is a zero impact building due to its high efficiency and the production of energy through the photovoltaic system. So, a very great innovation for the Cuban market. In Italy, we are also working training in the collaboration with the university and the Arch Bureau of Italy, and we are working to promote the restoration of modern architecture, which is the new frontier also for Italy, but it is very, very important for our sector. The Italians are not able to restore only the big monuments and artifacts, but we are able to protect and restore the normal context, the daily context, and the architecture of the 19th century. Last but not least, I am concluding my presentation. We have been challenged during the last year in many ways. You know that we have had earthquakes and major destruction of entire areas, a similar effect that you are facing in Libya, and we have developed a way to manage and rebuild and protect the cultural heritage. I think we are in the world the only country which have developed this way of professionality into the reconstruction of monuments. An invitation, last but not least, as Restauro, together with the Italian Trade Agency and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, promoting the annual Restoration Week. This year it will be from the 6th to the 10th of June. We are starting in Milan. We are moving to Bologna. We are stopping in Ferrara at the Salone del Restauro of the National Salone del Restauro, and we are heading to Venice on Friday. A week to talk about restoration. We will be glad to invite 3-4 delegates of the Libyan institution to participate to our Restoration Week in presence in Italy, but we are promoting the Restoration Week also online, so 1 hour and a half every day during this week to talk about and interact in the restoration field. So I'm pleased to make an official invitation and to send you afterwards more details about that event, which will take place very soon. Thank you very much for your attention. Very sorry for but I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you very much. It is a very important association that we have we got some knowledge of today. What struck me is how much UNESCO is involved in Italy. I think we need to tell UNESCO it is time to be
Good afternoon from me. I hope you can hear me and also see the slides. Thank you for including us in this interesting workshop, even though it's had many problems since this morning. I hope at least this presentation will go smoothly. Our presentation is really in many ways different than the previous ones because it deals with a larger scale. Our company was invited several years ago to prepare a conceptual vision plan for the reconstruction of Benghazi. And that led eventually to the assignment of doing a new master plan for the city of Benghazi, which naturally includes several in-depth studies for specific areas. One of these areas is the Old City area, and I will speak about that one today because that is where, of course, all the historical buildings are concentrated. Now, the coastal damage, the coastal areas of Benghazi were the ones that were most heavily damaged. At the same time, they were the most heavily populated areas before the war. But now it is important to remember that they are, especially the Old City, they're practically empty. People had to move out during the Civil War, and only some squatters have moved back in, which in itself presents another problem. So our immediate intervention will have to do with the evaluation of the existing conditions, the reconstruction of the corniche, and at the same time the pedestrianization of the corniche, of course the preservation and reconstruction of the heritage buildings, and the archaeological areas that have to be looked at, which in the second stage will lead to the establishment of zoning and development controls. The destruction of the Old City included both historical buildings and new buildings and the residential quarters. But as you will see in this slide, which is really quite important, the destruction was mostly in the surrounding areas along the port and along the coast. In the colors here, the red and the orange represent severe damage. The yellow represents less important or less severe damage, which means buildings that can be easily fixed and reused. This extensive large damage leads to this next slide. Well, sorry, just to give you some statistics, out of a total of 3,000 buildings, 1,000, 1/3, were very substantially, either completely or very substantially destroyed. The other 2/3 can be fixed. But the damaged buildings also give the opportunity for new projects and restoration in a more general way of entire city blocks. Here you see these are the city blocks where the damage has been so extensive that basically rebuilding is going to be necessary. There are very few empty plots within the city because the Old City was almost totally built up before. Before the destruction, and especially before the Second World War, there were several architectural characteristic zones in the city. This surrounding area is the area that had the Italian monumental architecture and civil architecture. The central area was the more Ottoman style area, and of course then the commercial area was down here. Now, from all of these historic buildings, unfortunately, very few have survived. We're talking maybe of around 10 important buildings that have survived and are certainly worth reconstructing. Unfortunately, in the internal area where there were a lot of interesting buildings until maybe 10, 15 years ago, these and even before the Civil War were torn down and replaced by modern buildings. This is especially true in this area here, where the lower, smaller Arab traditional buildings were located. Now, two of the most iconic architecturally elements and buildings were the street with the arcades, Omar al-Mukhtar Street, and the old municipality, the old Ottoman municipality. That one was quite heavily destroyed, but has been partially already reconstructed. Still, it is possible to proceed with an internal reconstruction and reuse. The street is something that still has to be done. Here you see the pre-war land use. Again, in the surrounding areas, there was a lot of institutional uses. And then as you go towards the center of the area, you have more mixed commercial residential uses. And in the central area, primarily residential uses. The only area where you had almost exclusively residential uses was near the archaeological area here on the right side. But these areas have been very run down and almost totally abandoned today. Just to give you an indication of the age of the buildings, the dark color is the older buildings, which are some of them from the 1800s. The orange ones are from the 1850s to the 1950s, and the yellow ones are after 1950. As you see in the area where we have the most damage, there are several orange parcels, but also quite a lot of yellow buildings, which means buildings of the modern era. Just two examples of the destruction and the possible reconstruction. Here we have the old souk, which today looks like this, and which hopefully could be turned into something like this after the reconstruction. Here we have the old palace, an Italian building, very heavily damaged, but all the plans exist, and hopefully it can be restored to look like something like this, the way it used to look 20 or 30 years ago. Another aspect which we looked at is the remains of the ancient city. The ancient city of Bereniki was situated underneath the old city, and only some part of it has been excavated today, where the old lighthouse is located. Now, we are proposing as part of our plan that all the new buildings in this area are first excavated by archaeologists if they're going to be reconstructed, and then if there are important or interesting ancient finds underneath, then maybe the new construction can preserve them the way we have done in Athens with many of our antiquities. Another important thing that we're proposing is to rebuild a museum next to this site using an architectural competition. And here is the site of antiquities that is open, and this is the area around where more antiquities may be found. And then there is this area here where you have, as you can see on the next slide, some buildings totally destroyed, and here is an opportunity to demolish these buildings and use this site, which is right next to the archaeological site, for a new museum, doing it through an architectural competition so that elements of the old Benghazi can also be reintroduced, and then architectural elements. Now, the important considerations looking at the old city for us was, one, to maintain the urban architectural character of the area. Two, to maintain the mixed use nature of the area, because this was a very vibrant, alive area today, but today is totally unused. It is important to establish the ownership status, because it is only in the public properties that we can intervene more quickly. Then we have to look at funding alternatives and financial tools. and also to consider the possible role of the new Central Authority for Reconstruction, which has now been formed, but whose role has not yet been totally clarified. Another aspect I have to touch on very quickly is the major roads and circulation. Benghazi has these radial roads with spokes going out, which date back to the original master plan by my compatriot and teacher, Mr. Doxiadis. Today, there is a lot of urban sprawl around, and one of the aims of our new master plan is to try and incorporate these areas in the plan in a reasonable way. But today also there is a proposal for a major coastal avenue that would go right in front of the old city and really cut it off from the sea. And therefore, one of the major things in our mind is to change this by introducing another ring road expressway entirely outside the city, and downgrading the coastal avenue so that the old city can be again linked and opened up to the sea. We want to take this whole coastal area and turn it into a pedestrian area where you will have cafes, restaurants, parks, and also to create a new beach here by building some underground, under the water breakwaters, so that this beach can be used more extensively. So that all of this, which today is covered by traffic, will be given back to pedestrians. Hopefully someday there will be a rapid transit introduction, but of a low scale, like a tram or a minibus. And there will only be one lane of traffic with some parking for services. And both on the coastal side and on the inside side where the buildings are, there will be a lot of activities that are primarily oriented towards pedestrian usage. And so the kind of zoning we have in mind will be one where mixed use is maintained along the periphery. And as we move towards the center, there is more emphasis on residential. But everywhere, except for maybe some small areas here, there will be mixed use, residential and commercial and institutional. The blue is the institutional sites. So what we have in mind is, in the denser parts, a vertical separation, where on the lower levels you'll have commercial, then you could have office or institutional uses, and on the top you could have residential uses. And higher buildings on the periphery as already exist today, and getting lower as we move towards the inside of the town. But we have some very important repopulation considerations, because, as I said, due to the destruction, the city is now vacant, and therefore we have to consider the profile of the future residents, their social and financial considerations, how to deal with the squatters, because according to Libyan law, the people who are squatting in the buildings cannot be kicked out. Therefore, other methods have to be found to evict them. And at the same time, we have to help the previous owners that have damaged buildings to rebuild them. And again, of course, we need to look at the possibilities of collaborating with local architects and engineering officers who have knowledge and on-hand capabilities that can help in this process. Now, coming back to the squatters, because this is an important issue, we have to find methods of giving them housing outside the area, or providing them with grants or some equivalent housing, so that they can leave the buildings, so that reconstruction can proceed. Now, we want to emphasize pedestrianization, not only along the coast, but inside the old city as well. And we want to introduce some more green spaces by using, this is the lighter green, the darker green is existing squares, and the lighter green is new open spaces introduced where old buildings have been totally demolished, and so we can introduce these new open spaces. And then also all the orange lines will be primarily pedestrian streets. And also we will introduce a one-way traffic system to make it less attractive for through traffic and to make it easier to have these pedestrian streets. These pedestrian streets, I should say, are also combined to a large degree with arcades in the Italian style. Ultimately, we want to introduce methods of public transport, minibuses inside and along the periphery, a tram line. Of course, this is not something that will happen in the next few years, but later, after the reconstruction has started. In the first phase, it will be more minibuses. The old souk, I mentioned before, will be reconstructed with arcades. And another important area, which is the area near the archaeological site, which up to 2002 was low housing, but today part of it has become high-rise housing and in many ways unfortunately not very attractive, and only a small portion of it has remained with the old, very old 18 and 1900s houses. So we want to separate this part and make it into a tourist destination and a heritage village, because it's the only part of the old city where there are really old, traditional, small Arabic buildings that can be reconstructed. So here are our aims. We want to establish detailed zoning and land use proposals, control guidelines, special controls and specifications for buildings that need preservation, detailed studies for the corniche, and that is an immediate priority because that will open up the city to the water. And then, of course, to back it up and make it functional, circulation of public transport studies and utility studies. At the same time, there has to be exemplar designs of specific buildings, reconstructing iconic buildings like the cathedral, which has already been mentioned, constructing the new museum, which gives an opportunity for an international competition, and reconstructing the internal part of the old municipality, which again could be done by local competition, and the same thing for the heritage preservation village. So now that we're finally getting into the plan, just to outline our objectives for the next 6 months or so, we need to develop the objectives, of course, with the stakeholders, socioeconomic, environmental, the road of the new authority, identify, this is where all of you come in, identify possible local and international institutions and private contributors for the reconstruction of the old city, and altogether formulate policies and strategies to re-establish the residential mixed-use areas and make the old city livable again. At the same time, we want to start GIS digital base map, compilation, complete detailed photographic surveys of all the buildings, start the preservation map preparation, and do the groundwork for the architectural competition. There's a lot of work there, and there is a lot of scope for everybody to pitch in and help. And at the end, we hope to establish this new greener Benghazi with pedestrian, green and open coastal zone, and also an internal green spine, but I will not speak about this now. This is for the future. Thank you very much.
التاريخ وشارك في
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. And my name is Jacopo Galli, and I'm an assistant professor at UOV University of Venice, University of Architecture in Venice. And this brief presentation that I'm doing today is titled Reconstruct, which means reconcile conflict for strategic resilience in urban contexts and territories. It is a result of an extensive collaboration with multiple colleagues from different universities, and it's a research that UOV has been carrying out in the last few years through the work of consultancy with different international organizations, such as UNESWA in Beirut and the World Bank. And we start from the idea that current conflicts have a huge risk of relapsing. Conflict recurrence can be triggered by reconstruction efforts that favor certain group and increase inequality. And in order to avoid this danger, we strongly believe that an approach based on a process rather than a project is necessary. It is an ecosystem of plans and intervention, which would allow for the reconstruction to become a resource of economic development by achieving the full employment of locals, and also to achieve a quick leap forward from a technological standpoint. But first and foremost, a good reconstruction may avoid conflict recurrence. For this reason, the strategy we are presenting today proposes a complete change to the current reconstruction systems. Today, national and transnational actors operate with a top-down approach that favors large financial loans to large companies operating with a large-scale infrastructure. A single project designed at a distance by normally a large firm. We know that this strategy does not work. We have seen it in many cities, for example, in Baghdad, in Beirut, but we know that there is an alternative. The alternative is a bottom-up strategy that starts from small loans to many people and builds up a different city. In this way, what can be said, can be defined as gradual credit, becomes an instrument of regeneration that triggers continuous, complex, circular, and sustainable changes. In a bottom-up, the initial financial support for reconstruction generates local employment and an income divided among the members of the community. That what remains on side of the current top-down strategy is very low. We calculated that only 15% of the financial resources remain in. And we estimated that with the same multiplier, the bottom-up system that we imagine can increase the percentage of local content up to 6%. The top-down approach is applied through a vertical layer order, subdivided in function or layers, such as infrastructure, education, health, etc., which generates significant problems in terms of coordination, execution, and timing, and lead to an incomplete and non-homogeneous reconstruction of the city. The bottom-up approach, on the contrary, can instead be applied through a strategy where an organic system of urban cells allows for the complete reconstruction of the city as a sum of smaller finite elements. To better explain, let's say this is a contemporary city, and they all more or less look the same. Even when stricken by destruction, this preserves memories of the past. Let's say that the tabula is never rasa. And reconstruction can start from the historical and civic preserved in the city, and can be triggered by the establishment of a laboratory for the sharing of innovative reconstruction processes. Within the urban cell, small factories producing building components can start to operate and made components with waterless technologies, the reuse of the rubble of the war, and small construction companies can use this component to rebuild the city by employing local labor, allowing for a high level of participation by the local community that can benefit from the reconstruction revenues, and generating and exponential increase in the local content, in the use in which gradual money is transformed into local money. The cellular bottom-up reconstruction is a new strategy of sustainable urban design grounded in the area of historic city as opposed to the post-industrial global city. The strategy starts from a proper conservation of historical core that needs to be considered at the first and most important urban cell. And this can lead to the complete of the city. The historical core can act as a model for the future of the city, and this strategy has many advantages. It has advantages in coordination, because the process can involve directly citizens, institutions, communities in the design process, blind spots. It has advantages in terms of control, because the cellular scale of the construction allows for immediate measurability and adaptability. Of emulation, because the design solutions are immediately replicable in other cells and other neighborhoods. In scalability, because the main variable at different scales, from the building to the city to the territory, through the same concepts. It has a secure time frame, because the strategy allows to assess time frames considering all the multiple variables. It allows for the involvement of local population, because the local can participate actively in self-produced reconstruction, and it ensures place attachment, the idea that the tangible heritage value of the city can be preserved and reestablished. And also, it is a form of community design. It is a collaborative process that allows to react to changes and avoid the discharged fixed scheme. Given this overall strategy, we need a design approach capable of representing the application of the strategy in the specific needs of each part of the city and each cultural and urban environment. The development of the post-industrial city, which began during the post-war period, has led all global cities to share a common condition. Historical cores are small, and they are surrounded by an enormous urban sprawl with low urban densities and, notably, very low urban quality. The ratio between historical cores and post-industrial urban sprawl is variable, but in our research we have calculated that on average historical cores are 7 to 8% of the total urban area. In the Middle East and North Africa region, here we can see an example of Damascus, such a ratio is even lower, with historical cores that are on average 5% of the total area. So, historical cores and post-industrial cities, historical cores are very small and post-industrial city is very big. They need a radically different intervention strategies. Historical core can be reconstructed through urban restoration approach that aims at preserving and regenerating the high-quality urban fabrics of the cores, while post-industrial city need a different strategy that we defined as urban triggers. Urban restoration is an approach for the study, the conservation and regeneration of historical centers that has been very successful and established thanks to its conceptual clarity and tangible results. And it starts from the notion of restoration that is typical of modern culture, and applies not only to buildings and works of art, but also to cities and territories, maintaining at the different scales a sustainable same meaning. Urban restoration is a method of action in consolidating urban cores with the objective of preserving what is left of the social body, of the organic relationship between people and place of attachment. Urban restoration was developed at University in Venice. As we know, the Venice Charter is still today a very important document, and it's a strategy that has found incredibly success, and some people spoke about it even earlier. Was perfect the application in context, in the Italian context, such as in Bologna, in Brescia, in Venice, in Palermo, and was then exported in very many cities in the world, Sana'a, in Baghdad, in Cuzco, in Peru, in La Habana. The central element of the urban restoration mechanism that can lead to the reconstruction, to the complete reconstruction of the city, is the idea and the necessity to consider the whole historical core of the city with its homogeneous urban pattern and its major buildings as a single element to conserve in its entirety. This does not mean that any change within the city is to be discarded, but on the contrary, most part can be substituted or used for different functions, but it means that the object of our design effort must be the city as a whole, to be considered as a single work of art, given to us by the patient work of generations that has led to the current condition. The whole urban restoration strategy is based on just 4 drawings that summarize all the needed information and provide a base for interventions that, given the difficulty in material intervention, economic resources, might require even a time frame of years, sometimes decades. The first drawing that we can see here in the example of Bologna is the conditions of the building and shows the level of conservation of each unit and the possibility of modification. Just as an information, the yellow parts are the ones that are completely modifiable while respecting the urban pattern and its density. So it is a strategy that allows a large modification of the city. The second drawing, as in the example of Brescia, is the map of function, keeping together current uses, residential, commercial, as well as future possibilities for new uses that can be the confirmation of the original function or completely different ones, taking into consideration the dimension of the construction, as well as the current and future needs of the population. The third drawing, as in this example of Cartagena de las Indias, is the map of building types, subdividing the build stock, a typological system that allows to unify the design strategies for the conservation of similar buildings. The fourth and last map, as here in the example of Palermo, is the map of the prescription or surgeries that can be implemented in the city. It is a sum of design ideas or a menu of intervention that can be carried out directly by different architects and companies within this common framework that must be provided by the city. The map of prescription allows to induce positive design choices to the single designers in an open system based on shared set of rules. The interventions listed with the map can be carried out directly by the city administration or by private investors and can generate multiple different solutions, all responding to one single same concept. But in order to allow the transition from destroyed post-industrial fabric, as we have seen, are a lot larger than the historical cores, to sustainable urban a new urban order, it is necessary to apply another strategy that we define as urban triggers. If urban restoration mechanisms allow intervention, we need a new strategy for non-historical parts. And the current paradigm of fixed design, we think, for the current condition of the city, needs to be abandoned in favor of a new approach in which the construction of the public space acts as a trigger of urban metamorphosis, with the final objective of building the sustainable city of the future, self-regulated and self-organized. The final configuration of the urban public cell is the result of what we define as a growing evolutionary mechanism, where the individuated key elements grow together through a process led directly by the local community. Using public spaces that we see here in green and red as a trigger, the fabric of the urban cell is defined through a process rather than a fixed design, and the final outcome is only one of the possible solutions with the range of possibility that, as we can see in these drawings, can be simulated and controlled through mathematical models. The process of each urban cell, based on growing evolutionary mechanisms, starts from the application of urban triggers and the positioning of reconstruction laboratories, as we can see here, at destroyed cities. Laboratories can act as a steering element for the future development of the urban fabric, enable local communities to get the necessary conceptual and operational tool for the bottom-up reconstruction of the urban fabric, favoring new approaches that allow a complete reshaping of the urban fabric without the necessity to follow a traditional top-down design, which will be Reconstruction Lab can initiate reconciliation activity, meeting, training, community dialogue, knowledge development, or even test small-scale building components, recycle materials, prototypes, and new technology. And urban triggers such as roads, squares, promenades will provide the necessary public space and act as a backbone for the development of the new urban fabric. While houses by dimension and type, as well as large-scale public facilities for commercial or cultural purposes, can be constructed by local companies trading in the use of new recycled waterless material. The final results avoid the unpleasant coexistence between public and vehicular traffic, and it's something that is different from the city that was destroyed. It's a new city. This is only a small part of a much larger research that we have been carrying out at UAV, and that aimed at the construction of a conceptual framework through a series of collaboration with public and private organizations, local and global partners. But first and foremost, we aim to find areas of the world where to apply the strategy and experiment on. We look forward on further collaboration. Thank you very much.
You can start speaking. We're all listening.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody. I would like to thank the municipality of Benghazi and the Italian consulate for this invitation and for having organized this important meeting. I had the privilege of working together with the Benghazi municipality in the past years, and I hope to continue this activity also in the near future. I greet all the colleagues who precede me and who have been a source of inspiration also for our future activities in an intervention in Libya. in Libya. Let me introduce very briefly the new projects that are involving us together with the Benghazi municipalities, together with other 19 Libyan municipalities. The project is called TAMSA, towards a new multi-level shared approach for Libyan local governance, and is managed by Arter. It's a company, it's a development agency of the Emilia-Romagna region based in Bologna. The main objective of the project is the adoption of new methodologies for the planning and implementation of local services in the field of environment, youth, social and health, as well as communication. These services addressed mainly to citizens and business will be designed and conceived with a multi-level governance approach. These are the municipalities that are involved in our TAMSA project. The TAMSA project is the result of also of other previous projects that we managed in Libya. All of them with a component of local strategic development and strengthening of local public administration. We start in 2012 with the civil initiative in Libya. After that there was the continuation with the civil initiative Libya 2, where the municipality of Benghazi were also involved. And after that, in 2008, we had a last project that it is support on Libyan local authorities to better management the reconstruction efforts. The overall objective of this project was to support the municipality of Benghazi to play a key role in the post-war reconstruction and political stabilization of the cities, specifically providing support to local institutions and civil society organizations to prepare themselves for the future reconstruction of the Great Benghazi and to attract national and international investors. With this project, we made, together with the municipality of Benghazi, we made a quick assessment of damages using the same methodology and the same strategy that we have used apply in our region after the earthquake, and for the identification and the priorities of intervention. We collect the data in a very embryonic GIS system, and we promote a participatory planning process for urban regeneration. Not all these objectives were achieved for several reasons, and one of these was the instabilities, the political instabilities in Libya. But we have a very indirect results that was the setting of the basis for the urban observatory that has been recently inaugurated in Benghazi. The common point of both this project, I mean last of all projects, were the multi-level governance approach for the development of policies that in LASR was the setting up of local governance model to support the design of a governance framework for the rebuild of the city. The other characteristic of all these projects that comes directly for our public administration is the participatory approach for the urban planning that emphasize the involvement of communities in the planning process. In the last decades, the participative approach was adopted as a governance tool for urban transformation. because of the growing complexity of the urban scenarios and by the numerous cases of failure of the traditional planning activity. The multi-level governance can facilitate well-managed and coordinate public policies because it is characterized by a mutual dependence among levels of government, vertically, horizontally, and in a network manner, with a broader involvement of local stakeholders. There is evidence that when decentralization is properly designed and implemented, it brings to a number of benefits for improved local public services delivery and provides a greater citizen engagement. On the contrary, a lack of an appropriate multi-level governance may lead to policy gaps, duplication, and overlap in policy delivery, which could bring to regional, local disparities and potential undermining of citizen trust on government, with consequences for public services delivery and therefore for the lives of the citizen that depends on these services. In Italian, partecipazione means take part and communicate and make known. The two types are referring on one end to the act of taking side and expressing its own opinion, and on the other side of sharing information and opinion. The participatory approach implies the adoption of a process that needs to be recognized and integrated in the process of the urban generation, urban planning, and design of public policies. This is more than just consulting citizen. The concept of participation in the context of urban transformation process refers to the possibility granted to the citizen as individual or through their association to influence the urban transformation process and its outcome. This implies that all those who have an interest in the project and in the territory, that in English are called stakeholders, have resources to offer to the process for improving the effectiveness, efficiency, equity, and the sustainability of the transformation process. It also assumes that the public administration and the big power, called in English stockholders, must be conceived that the participation can really provide benefits in developing territorial transformation that contribute to build, strengthen, and use the social capital that is present in every local community and territory, and therefore that the project can really be capable of responding in the best possible way to the needs of those who will have to live, to work, to use, or simply pass by every day. Taking this point of view means not only acquiring the techniques to facilitate this process by the public administration, but also promoting a transformation of the way of understanding urban planning and urban design that requires everyone to change approach and practices. But why we have to change? The public administration should change this approach and not just delegate to someone else. Because this implies to accept the contribution of management, planning, political, economic resources that normally are not considered, a truly and effectiveness openness attitude toward actors who can contribute with their resources, a willingness to negotiate and mediate between interests of various kinds and origins, an empowerment of all actors, starting from the assumption that everyone has something to offer, something to take, something to build in the process of a broader consultation. Without this minimum condition, it is difficult that this enlarged consultation can bring more results than the traditional, restricted and exclusive process. Who are the main actors of this process? The main actors, the one that have to start is, of course, the public administration. But with the 5 helix governance model for innovation why now we are applying the 5 helix model for innovation? Because our cities enhance the social dimension, to enhance the social dimension of the intervention. In other words, from 1998, we move from a model that better represents the industrial society with the relationship between public institution, university, and industry, that is the so-called triple helix model, to a model where we added the civil society as a creative class, like, for example, the association, the NGO, that are the depository of a know-how useful to generate social innovation. Now we add also the general or not organized public, composed by innovators, artists, creatives, and all other social actors who wish to provide a contribution and participate in the local economic and institutional development process. This model of the 5 helix, it is so important, at least in Europe, that was integrated in the Pact of Amsterdam, that it is the urban agenda of the European Union approved in Amsterdam in 2016. What kind of tools we can use? In Bologna, I saw that Bologna was mentioned several times, and Bologna was also, and Emilia-Romagna was also the target of several study visits organized with the personnel of the Emilia-Romagna. In Bologna, the municipality set up the Foundation Innovazione Urbana, it is called, that is dealing with urban transformation. These are the tools that were set up by the Fondazione Innovazione Urbana. So when we are moving to a participatory approach, we are moving from the non-participation that correspond to a very widespread political strategy that can be summarized as public administration decide, announce, and defend its position. That is very common in the existing practices because, for example, because the public administration is convinced of having the full capacity to express the interest of the community, and it can take the risk of taking the decision. When we are moving from this old model to a more open model, we have a different degree of openness of the communication. So it could be just an information communication that it constitutes the first level of participation of citizens in the public management and the first level of dialogue with the public administration. we can have a consultation that foresees a structured interaction on specific themes. We can have also an active collaboration that introduces the concept of empowerment. That means the possibility of the participant to influence the transformation, the urban transformation. And we can also have, like in this slide, the factory that imply the direct control of the participant of all the phases from the concept, the design, the production, and the management. And it doesn't matter if it is at the building scale or at territorial transformation. In fact, this kind of approach, it is possible to be used in different scales. It is possible to apply in a largest phase, for example, for territorial planning at the urban scale. We can apply this model at the urban, at the district scale, so more small, but we can also apply this model at the zone scale, as has been said also in the intervention before. But we can also apply this approach to a single building. Why we are moving to one of the recommendations that I would like to do is that in any case the public administration is defining the framework of the intervention. So there are the internal sector of the administration that is designing at which level we have to make this transformation. Together with citizens and stakeholders, the public administration can identify the priorities and can start the opening procedure for the participation of the citizen, that can start from the concept ideation, co-design, and sharing. I would like to underline that at the end, who will implement and monitoring all the activity will be the municipal technician and the project manager. In a conclusion, why we are using, or we are suggesting to use this approach, or why we are using this approach in our territory, for example in Bologna. Because of its effectiveness, participation offers advantages relating to the adjustment of the procedure's outcome to set the objective. The early confrontation with the different actors allows to identify more precisely the needs and to define adequate strategies for solving the problems. The level of planning is generally higher, and the process itself is a strong tool for monitoring results. Another reason is the efficiency. The participation allows, from one end, to remove obstacles from the decision-making path, and therefore to avoid additional economic costs, resolving, for example, the conflict in advance that often arise in urban transformation process. But I would like to underline the last point, is the long-term and the social sustainability. Participation produces add values, refers to long-term changes that occur not only in the context of the intervention, but also with reference to the actors participating in the process and the system of relation that exists among them. Thank you very much.
You can start speaking.
Yes, please. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for waiting for so long. Sorry. I would like to start with a definition of accessibility to cultural heritage, which was published by the Italian Minister of Culture and Tourism in 2017 within the strategic plan for development of tourism. The definition states that accessibility means existence of conditions which allow accessibility for tourism and use through mobility system, including sustainable ones, contributing to reducing the isolation and the peripheral or poorly served areas in which exploitable resources are present. Privileged tourism for everyone, irrespective of age, health, or any other distinction, allow visitors to understand and interpret the history, complexity, and variety of the assets they visit, highlighting their uniqueness and strengthening the identity of the places. As you can understand, the definition complies the principles of design for all. It is not only about people with disability, and consider both the possibility to reach the place, to move around it, physical permeability, and to understand the meaning of cultural heritage in order to enhance the memory and the identity of a place, cultural permeability. This could be a first answer to the question contained in the title of my presentation. According to a correct approach to the conservation, I think that to legitimate the transformations to reach accessibility, in general, we need to consider it within the whole project of restoration, such that with one intervention, we can reach more goals. With regard to the type of intervention, with particular attention to the material consistency, in a very schematic way, we can act with subtraction, substitution, addition. Obviously, most of the time, all of them are present, but I think, generally speaking, that addition is the most suitable and correct way. I will show two examples to better explain what I said so far. The first one is related to the castle in Saliceto, northwestern Italy, which has a quite typical layout plan, a compact rectangular building with 4 towers at the corners. A tower fell down and we don't know when and why. In early 2000, the project of restoration began, and the first question was, must we rebuild the lost tower? If so, in which way, which shape and materials? They decided to rebuild the lost tower, so it is an addition with some subtraction for the openings to connect it to the castle, as you see in the picture. Moreover, this addition is to be understood as a new layer of the history of the castle that must speak a contemporary architectural language so that it can be distinguished from the old parts, the cultural permeability. Moreover, the new tower contains an elevator that connects all different levels and guarantees the accessibility, the block of toilets, the plants, the safety stairs, and everything about the modernity is necessary for this castle. The cladding is made by different types of wood to recall the masonry wall that is existing. Coming to the Benghazi Cathedral, I will like to propose some consideration about the accessibility and the relationship with conservation. By comparing the original design we found in the Italian archives and the old photo with nowadays situation, I want to point out that the strong link, now interrupted by the street, must be rebuilt so that a better understanding of the cathedral, cultural permeability, can be reached, and the issue of accessibility, physical permeability, can take advantages in terms of both architectural design and functionality from the reorganization of the square. To solve properly the issue of accessibility, I think that we should ensure everybody can enter from the main door according to the principles of design for all. Solutions like stair lift or platform lift do not work for many reasons, so we need to solve the accessibility with an architectural design, considering that the differences in levels is almost 2 meters. The proposed solution is a ramp divided into 3 parts on the left side of the facade. This system becomes part of the redrawing of the entire square, which assumes a geometric pattern with main, secondary, and tertiary paths. The spaces among these paths are filled with vegetation, green areas, water, ponds, and different stones which recall the stones present in the cathedral and along the Benghazi waterfront. The overall drawing of the square is rigorous, geometrical, and symmetrical, and the ramp becomes part of it as a new layer of the cathedral's history, the layer of modernity that encompasses accessibility. In order to make the project recognizable as a modern addition without losing its relationship with the existing building, the cladding on the ramp's side is travertine slabs engraved to recall the stone ash slab arranged in horizontal courses. The walking surface is made of grey granite slabs to establish a dialogue with the existing staircase, also made of the same material. The entire system, ramps and landings, is equipped with a 1 meter high balustrade made from extra clear glass. This example shows as the accessibility is not something that stands alone, but stands within the whole project, the whole restoration project, such that we can solve with an intervention we can achieve more goals, such that the accessibility and the replace of the link between the cathedral, in this case, and the square, such that we can reestablish the previous situation with a contemporary project. Thank you for your attention, and that's all.
Thank you very much, Professor Alberto. It's been a very, very fruitful day for us. Before I can pass the mic to our representative, our ambassador to the UNESCO, Mr. Saleh Agam, I would like to take the opportunity in my name and in the name of the city of Benghazi. We thank the Italian consulate for his effort. It's a very tough day for the day. It's been very frustrating because of the technology, but it's been a very, very fruitful day, full of information. We have gained so much, and we're looking for a very great future to cooperate both on the local and international stage with at this point, I'll pass on the mic to Mr. Saleh. Thank you very much. Mr. Saleh.
long day. It has been, as you know, quite challenging. And I just want to dedicate to all of us a segment of a famous speech that most of you, because you're
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
أستاذ صالح تقدر تتكلم؟
الصوت واضح عندك مسموع؟
إن شاء الله واضح.
إن شاء الله. السلام عليكم. حقيقة أنه من دواعي السرور والشرف أن أكون معكم في ورشة العمل التي تنظم من أجل إعادة إعمار مدينة بنغازي القديمة. مدينة بنغازي أو كما يعلم الجميع عرفت بأسماء عدة: يوسبردس، برنيكي، وأخيرا بنغازي، مدينة تاريخها موغل في القدم. إنشائها يعود إلى أواخر القرن تقريبا الربع الأخير من القرن السادس قبل الميلاد، واستمرت الحياة فيها إلى اليوم. تعرضت عبر تاريخها إلى العديد من الفترات اللي شهدت فيها تخريب ودمار، ولكنها كانت دائما تنبعث من وسط الرماد كطائر الفينيق لتحلق عاليا في سماء العمران والتصالح والازدهار. بنغازي مدينة تستحق منا أن نوليها الاهتمام، فالشكر، كل الشكر لكل الأخوة القائمين على إقامة هذا المؤتمر أو هذه الورشة، ورغم التحديات التي واجهتهم خاصة صباح اليوم فيما يتعلق بالاستعدادات التكنولوجية نقدر نقول، إلا أنهم تغلبوا عليها، وأنا أعتقد في تقديري أن هذا عمل رائع سيؤدي إلى نتائج باهرة إن شاء الله. أنا كمندوب دائم وسفير لليبيا في منظمة اليونسكو سأعمل جاهدا من جانبي على أن تتبنى هذه المنظمة عملكم هذا وتقوم بدعمي، وهذا أمر قد سبق وأن حدث في أماكن أخرى. وإحياء مدينة الموصل مشروع اليونسكو ليس منا ببعيد، فقد تم توقيعه من قبل المديرة العامة في عام 2019، وهو قيد الإنجاز الآن، وأسفر عن نتائج مهمة وكثيرة. نتمنى أن تكون بنغازي أيضا من ضمن اهتمامات هذه المنظمة، لأن المدينتان تعرضتا لنفس التدمير من قبل الإرهاب والعنف اللي شهدتها المدينتين في العشر سنوات الأخيرة. أتمنى أن يتم الحفاظ في أعمال ترميم هذه المدينة على نسيجها العمراني وعلى تراثها وموروثها الثقافي، وأيضا يجب الاهتمام إلى أن مدينة بنغازي تحت ركامها ما زال هناك تاريخ كثير مدفون تحت هذه الأنقاض، يجب أن يؤلى الاهتمام أيضا أثناء القيام بأعمال الترميم والصيانة لموروثها العمراني وموروثها الحضري. أتمنى أن نضع في اعتبارنا أن جزء كبير من تاريخ مدينة بنغازي لا زال مدفونا، وقد تكون هناك فرصة في أن نستكشف البعض منا، وهذا سيضيف إلى المدينة قيمة إضافية ويضيف لها إلى تاريخها المزيد من الأهمية. وهذا أيضا جانب تستطيع منظمة اليونسكو أن تساهم فيه من خلال المراكز الاستشارية التابعة لها مثل الإكرم والإيكوموس وغيرها. أشكركم مرة أخرى، وأشكر القنصلية الإيطالية على الجهود التي تقوم بها، والقنصل الإيطالي الحقيقة الذي يبرز الدور الإيجابي للعلاقات الليبية الإيطالية في مجالات عديدة. منها مجال إعادة إعمار مدينة بنغازي القديمة. أتمنى لكم التوفيق، وأنا على استعداد أن أتعاون مع جهاز إعادة الإعمار ومصلحة الآثار أيضا سيكون لها جانب في هذا الموضوع، وأن أعمل معكم من أجل الحصول على دعم دولي لإنجاح هذا المشروع. وشكرا لكم على إتاحة هذه الفرصة لي. شكرا لكم.
شكرا لك أستاذ صالح.
ليلي خلاص مش عارف كيف جات لك، المهم ما قال لي يحكي نسمع فيك حكي.
رياض رياض رياض